In this video, our Camaro gets a set of KW coilovers. What's up guys, Greg here and welcome back to another Project Camaro episode. And this time we're addressing our suspension once again. Now a while back we did some suspension modifications by installing a set of BMR lowering springs and AFE Control Series sway bars. Now those BMR springs definitely improve the handling on this car by lowering the center of gravity, but that's only one aspect. We need more control and more adjustability. So in this video, we're installing a set of KW coilovers. This is really going to allow us to dial in the suspension on this car, really make it handle so it's ready for the track. What are we waiting for? Let's get this car on the lift. Let's get started. All right guys, like with most installs, it all starts with the disassembly. I'm going to start with the front end of our Camaro and get these factory struts ripped out of the car. All right guys, that was pretty quick. We got both front struts unbolted from the steering knuckles on the bottom. Now it's just a matter of opening the hood, unbolting them from the strut towers on either side, and taking them on out. All right guys, factory struts are completely disassembled and we have what we need, which is the OE strut bearing plate for the top. Now we need to mount this onto our new KW coilovers, but before we even get to that, I want to adjust these coilovers so that the heights are going to be exactly the same on both sides of the car. Now KW gives you specifications in the instructions of the lowest possible setting for the suspension and the highest possible setting. We are going to set it just a tick above the lowest setting, which is 4.9 inches. We're just going to round it off at 5 inches. Now to measure it, you want to measure from the top strut mount bolt right here to the bottom of the spring seat. We'll go ahead and just center that out in that bolt and measure to the bottom of the spring seat, and we're just at about 5 inches right there, which is perfect. Once that's done, we're going to go ahead and lock the lower spring seat down with the provided Allen key and put our top strut mount on. All I'm doing right now is locking down the adjustment sleeve for the lower spring seat. Don't got to go crazy on this, just want to make sure it's snug. Now that's not moving. All right, now we need to swap over our OE strut bearing plate for the top strut mount over to the new coilover. Just want to get a couple threads going. Perfect. Hold it in place. All right, now that we got our OE strut mount swapped over to our new KW coilovers, we can get these bolted in the Camaro. Now it's worth noting these are side specific and KW does actually indicate that on the bottom decal of the coilover. Make sure they go on the right side of the car. I usually like just get a couple of these bolts in just to help me hold the strut up, and luckily these coilovers are worlds lighter than the factory strut, so it makes it a lot easier. All right guys, KW coilovers are bolted up to the strut towers in the Camaro. Now it's just a matter of bolting everything back together the exact way that we took it apart. So we're gonna get the steering knuckle bolted up, all the other odds and ends, and the front end is almost done. All right guys, so if your 6th generation Camaro came with the magnetic ride control from the factory, it is not going to be compatible with your new KW coilovers. That feature was built into the factory struts. And to make sure we don't get any kind of warning lights on the dashboard or anything else, you need to get the cancellation kit from KW, which are going to include these dummy sensors. Essentially what we're going to do is plug this into the factory harness and hide these behind the inner fender liner in the front. And again, that way we're going to avoid any kind of warning lights or fault codes coming up on the dash. All right, so now that we have these installed onto our sensor, this is gonna allow us to essentially, if you come on in here, just clamp this right onto the sheet metal. So this thing will not move. Pretty cool, huh? Then I'm going to take the remainder of the factory harness, kind of coil it up, and we will just kind of hide it inside of this fender well, put a couple zip ties on it, and it'll be good to go. This is all tucked and hidden away, connectors plugged in, dummy sensors hanging off the sheet metal. We can put our inner fender liner back exactly where it was, and this side is essentially complete. All right, guys, now it's time to tackle the rear suspension on our Camaro. I'm first going to get started by removing this inner fender liner so we can install that dummy sensor for the magnetic ride control. Then it's going to be about removing this shock and coil spring. Now, unlike the front, where the coilover is going to be one assembly, the shock and spring are independent from each other in the rear of the car due to the independent style rear suspension. Once that's all out, we can then start swapping over our new KW components, and we're going to be done in no time. I'm just going to kind of move this out of the way for two reasons. One, to get in here to the upper shock mount, as well as, again, that wiring harness for the magnetic ride control. So we can just kind of shove this down for now. All right, this actually fits in here very well. Hey-o. All right, guys, just like the front coilovers, we need to use the factory OEM mount for the rear shock for our new KW setup. Quite honestly, you actually remove this wire to get this nut off anyway, so we're just going to go ahead and cut it. Now, that is not the approved method for the new shocks, but for the old ones, it's just fine. All right, guys, you're going to take that factory bump stop spacer that we just took off, then your OEM shock mount, top plate, and use the provided nut to center it all up. Now I'm going to hold the center shaft and then just snug down that top lug nut. All right, it's ready to go in the car. All right, unlike the front coilovers that are all one assembly, in the rear, the shock and the spring are independent from each other. So this is actually the spring perch we're going to use for the new coil spring, and this is what's going to provide us the adjustment to raise and lower the car. Now, KW actually gives you a range of measurement, just like the front, for how low you can go and how high you should go with these. And we're going to kind of put that right in the middle by measuring an inch from this area of the spring perch where it mounts to the body to where the coil spring mounts on this area of the spring seat. All right, I'm going to get the whole coil spring assembly in, including the helper spring on the bottom, all as one piece. It's worth noting too, all of the stock rubber mounts that are on this BMR spring, they have to come out. You do no longer need these. If you leave these in, it's going to cause problems. The springs are not going to sit flush. Now we can get our adjustable upper spring seat, wiggle that into place. And I really like using a trans jack to kind of hold all the weight. Allows me to raise everything up while I hold this together. I need to turn this out. I want to make sure that my Allen key is somewhere that I can access it if I need to adjust it. Here, that can sit right on the factory mounts. right, guys, at this point, pretty much everything is back together. New shock and everything is in. I'm gonna put this fender liner back into place the way it was, and we're just about done with the rear suspension. All right, guys, first official road test with our new KW coilover suspension, and full transparency, this thing rides a lot better than I anticipated. Now, we actually lowered this thing quite low. We're set at both the front and the rear at practically the lowest setting that KW recommends on the coilovers. So this thing is not riding high. It is the perfect stance for street and track. Now, I haven't rubbed on anything just yet. But going back to the ride, I honestly kind of assumed that with a performance coilover that it would ride really stiff. And right now we have both our compression and our rebound dampening pretty much set right in the middle. And it is a very, very comfortable ride. And that kind of takes me to talk about just the overall adjustability. Now, like I said earlier, the BMR coil springs that we installed did make a drastic improvement in the handling, but just based on the lower ride height and lower center of gravity. These KW coilovers, on the other hand, give us this amazing adjustability to not only consistently change the ride height for different track applications, but that rebound and compression dampening adjustment, because right now this is set really comfortable for me to drive this car every day without a problem. But when I'm ready to hit the track, I can go ahead and stiffen up all four corners if I want to, or vary the stiffness on each individual corner for whatever the track conditions are that particular day. And that's one of the reasons why a coilover setup like this is so expensive, because you get all this adjustability and customization to dial in the suspension exactly how you want it. So far, I absolutely love it. Hey guys, I'm stalled at a stoplight right now, but let me talk a little bit about the handling of this car. It feels so incredibly balanced in the corners. It is unbelievable. Night and day difference from stock, and even a massive difference from those BMR lowering springs. This thing is so ready to hit the track, and I can't wait to do that. And you guys need to stay tuned for the day that we do hit the track with this Project Camaro. But for now, that's going to be the end of this episode. So if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Facebook and Instagram to stay up to date on all the progress for our Project Camaro, because coming soon, we have got some big upgrades to install. See you guys next time.